All right, hello and welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us for Hiring Best Practices with Kevin O'Keefe. My name is Jenna Blocker. I'm a Senior Executive Assistant for the Revenue Operations team here at Consensus, and I will be the moderator for today's session. As I'm sure you've heard, DemoFest is presented by Consensus. Transform how you sell with Consensus, the first product experience platform. Automate demos, drive faster decisions, and accelerate your growth. You can learn more about us at goconsensus.com or click Watch a Demo at the top of your screen. We do encourage you all to participate in today's session. You'll find a few ways to engage with us on the right side of your console. The chat function will allow you to connect with us as well as all the other attendees. We can kick off by getting that chat started. If you want to just chime in where you're calling in from, we'd love to hear. You can also find some helpful resources in the Docs tab. And lastly, Kevin will answer any questions at the end of the session. So please ask your questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A function. If at any time you are having technical difficulties, head to the gear icon on the bottom of your screen. There you will see a help document to troubleshoot common issues on the bottom left and also be able to check your settings and make sure they are all good to go. And now I would like to introduce you to our speaker, Kevin O'Keefe. Kevin is a pre-sales leader at Archer Integrated Risk Management with 20 plus years experience in the SaaS industry, combining a data-driven focus on supporting sales teams with a track record of sourcing, hiring, and developing top-notch talent, all coming together to deliver unmatched value to customers and prospects. Kevin's experience includes Resolver, Salesforce, and Archer. Kevin has beginnings in consulting, foundations as a solutions engineer, and a passion in leadership. And with that, Kevin, I will turn the rest of the time over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Well, great. I do really appreciate the Consensus team for setting this whole thing up and allowing me to come in today and present. We're going to be focused on hiring best practices. I'll get into a little bit about the specifics, but ultimately here today to talk shop about bringing in the best talent. So a little bit about me, just beyond what Jenna talked about. You'll see two photos there. Those are photos from the past two SKOs at Archer. Up top is our whole SE team. We like to have fun. Bottom left is us having some fun in Vegas the year before with a bunch of sales and other folks across the go-to-market team. And so, as Jenna mentioned, I've been in this, I guess, pre-sales side for about 15 years. The other part of my career, I was in professional services, setting up and implementing. And this happens to be now at Archer, my third time, running teams, being a leader in the pre-sales side. And that goes across small companies, Resolver, where I really started my career and moved in. I was actually the first SE there and started and grew the team. That was when I started there, less than 25 people, and when I left, closer to 300. And I went over to Salesforce, which we obviously know is a really, really big organization, tons of maturity in their solutions organization, lots to learn and lots to benefit from when you have such a large organization. Not only, like I said, maturity from the playbook standpoint, from the go-to-market standpoint, but lots of peers, lots of ability to learn from that. But a couple of years ago, I decided to come back to the GRC industry at Archer, and it's been fantastic. So just starting my second year here, and really, through all three of those, it's always been a focus around talent. That's what we're talking about today. I think it is incredibly important to align SEs, pre-sales folks to your sales organization that can really match up and benefit and drive impact there. In that, talent, bringing in talent, working with your talent, and really managing that whole process can be a full-time job. But I like to combine the strong talent, that I've had success bringing in and managing with data. I think that's been a differentiator for me in terms of looking at attach rates, win rates, information, and context. I really think context can be beneficial to both the sales side and the pre-sale side to drive really fantastic prioritization and really understand, hey, are we heading in the right direction? Is the data representing where we can spend our time properly to maximize our impact? And I think that's really due to a strong collaboration with sales. I think aligning and understanding what sales needs and working with them is been a big factor in my success. And so, that's a little bit about me. I didn't put anything in there, but I see that somebody's from Toronto. I'm also from Toronto. And I have a family. I have twins, a boy and a girl. They're 12 years old, and married, and spent a lot of time. You'll see my shirt in one of my photos. I like heavy metal. I'm a hockey coach, and I'm a big Buffalo Bills fan. So that's kind of a little bit about me as we get into some of our content today. So I really appreciate everybody attending, and you'll see some prompts soon to put some questions and responses in the chat. So hang tight on that. Okay, so what are we focusing on? Really three areas that I'm thinking about in terms of this hiring best practices tagline or headline. We're talking about attract. How do we attract talent? I think it's a combination of things. I really do feel like that you have to demonstrate and put out significant effort, but you do have to make sure that that is, in fact, working. Have a number of conversations, but don't just have conversations for the sake of it. We do have our day job, and you'll see me represent that a little bit down the line in another slide. But benefit from those conversations by learning and pulling together. Your ears to the street. You're learning from people as you have those conversations so that you understand what's going on in the market and what's going on with all of the candidates and talent out there so that you can really make your best decision on what direction to go in as you hire. And I'll get into this later with a little bit of like a scenario where we think about how marketing works, but you have to make sure that you are putting yourself out there in terms of it might be a session like today, it might be an authored article, any way that you are putting content out there that people can start to see and better understand your point of view. And that, again, I think as you deliver a message to candidates, that this supplements it so they can go back and understand your leadership approach. And if they align with that, then a lot of the selling, and I'll get to this later, a lot of the selling that you have to do can be addressed through that. And hey, if they don't like what you're putting out there, then they probably won't bother you, and you can move on from there. So make sure that content's pretty good. So then, as we bring people on, obviously retention is critical. I won't be focusing on this and the other area as much today, but critical things to think about as we look at the full cycle of bringing on and hiring talent. You will be absolutely making promises to candidates. You'll be telling them things about the organization, about the role, okay? And obviously, you have to follow through on those. So be extremely clear and set really good expectations. New managers, new leaders will make some mistakes there. Learn from those, obviously, but you can really support the fact that, hey, you're going to say some things as you go through this process of bringing on, somebody will be changing their role, changing their career to move on to you into your organization, onto your team. Let's make sure that you are communicating with them. And I think, one-on-ones can be very operational sometimes. I don't think it's a bad idea to touch on these key career development conversations regularly, right? And keep those lines of communication open. And for me, I think I don't know if I subscribe or prescribe, maybe that's the wrong word, to radical transparency, but I absolutely believe that you should share as much information as you can and as much context. And I think that's been helpful to folks who've worked with me and worked for me, that they have that context, and that can support retention. But I think if we're really talking about if you want to maintain strong retention, we are talking about development, and development is critical to underpinning or the foundation of retention. You need to find opportunities for your employees, for your team, for your direct reports, that both take passion and business impact and overlap. I think that is absolutely necessary. It keeps people's attention and keeps them driving forward, helps the business. That's kind of a no-brainer. But how do we get to that point? Well, certainly you want to make sure that you are trying to source those, and so you have to get creative. You have to have conversations within the organization, and but ultimately, sometimes, and I think many people on this call probably have children. I have children, like I mentioned before. If you ask them, "Hey, do you want to play soccer in the summer?" One kid might be enthusiastic and jump right in, and another might need a little bit of a push. And it can be a little tricky, but I do support that sometimes we may need to give a little bit of a push to individuals to reach out and sort of push themselves towards a development goal. And then it's important on my end as a leader to make sure that that's amplified. I mentioned I like heavy metal. The speakers that amplify the music that I really really like. I feel like that's my role. And of course, we talk about recognition. We talk about rewarding. Folks who are actively developing and sort of getting to that next level and seeing through their potential typically won't have too much of a problem with finding a path to a promotion or additional compensation or more responsibilities. And you have to really think about, what is the package deal? Is that compelling? Right? When it goes up to senior leadership and they make some decisions on where budgets go, right? Is that package really compelling? Has that individual pushed themselves and demonstrated an impact to the business? That's kind of the name of the game. So, as I mentioned, we won't be talking a ton about retention and development, but they will be aspects of what I'm talking about. We'll be focused mostly on the attraction element today. Okay. I'm sure everybody has seen real estate agent billboards. Okay. They're probably in every neighborhood. They're probably all over, no matter where your geography is. I don't know this person, by the way, but nice billboard. And she seems to be doing well. So why am I showing that? Well, real estate agents are the, top advertisers probably all over the place, and they use a specific method. They are regularly putting out how much they sold, or that they're the number one for their brokerage, or their area. And you think to yourself, well, why would they be putting that out there? And I think you have to put yourself in the shoes of somebody selling their house. The person who's selling their house is taking some risk. They need to work with an agent to get the house sold at the appropriate price within a certain amount of time, and they're really relying on, yeah, lawyer ads are a good one too. They're really relying on the credibility factor, right? I can almost guarantee you that I'll sell your house because I sell a lot of houses in that area. And so, borrowing from that, I want us to think a little bit as pre-sales leaders, right? As SE leaders, I want us to think a little bit about our brand. And I'm going to break this down. We're going to talk a little bit about our internal brand. We're also going to talk about our external brand. And then I have something that might be very similar to this billboard in a second. Hopefully that plays through. Okay, so let's talk about your internal brand. So say you're an SE leader, pre-sales leader, okay, you've put a job out on the internal board, or maybe old school up on a bulletin board. What are people in your organization thinking about you as a leader, right? Do they look at you and say, hey, people who work for Kevin, they're fantastic. They're doing all this great stuff. Are they thinking, hey, is there room for promotions? Are they capable of getting people moved up to potentially leadership? Is there a path there? These are all important things that people will look at as they go for a role and really evaluate a hiring manager, a potential manager. I think, does this person seen by others that they will stick their neck out and make sure that their people have what they need. Additionally, what's their relationship with managing up with senior leadership? Can they get things done? Have they demonstrated that? Lastly, do the folks who have been on your team, your alumni network, right? Are they speaking highly about you as a leader? And are they saying the things that you want them to say? Are they advocating for you? Now, I'll direct everybody over to the chat. Are there any other things that are relevant that I didn't put up here around your internal brand? If you're a leader looking to hire internally, does anybody have any ideas on something that I may have missed or didn't prioritize up here that's also important around your internal brand? Oh, wonderful. Um, those are two really good ones. I'll screen share. I'll grab those. Hopefully, there's some output later. For sure. How does so and so work with the other departments or lines of business? And do they have a track record for calling out individuals and making sure that they're recognized and again amplifying that? Thank you, Tim and Clifford. Those are really great examples. Let's switch over to external. Oh, last one there. Visibility, right? Um, Engagement with internal, external stakeholders. Good stuff. Let's go over to the external brand. So, what is your billboard as a a technology SE pre-sales leader? Well, it's LinkedIn. That is your billboard, right? Here's an example of mine. You actually didn't connect this till right now in this session, but I do have speakers on there because those are speakers from one of the bands that I like that I put in the background there. So funny enough. Okay, so can candidates get to your, point of view? Can they see how you think, what you care about, right? Do they have access to that, right? And can they, when they maybe come to meet you in your first call, do they have something to work off of? I think that's really important. And then, are they able to start to understand what makes you different, right? Are you just that typical manager, leader, or is there something that they can pick up on that really demonstrates your ability to make a difference for businesses, organizations, and the people in those groups? Um, does it show positively, right? This one I think is interesting too. Like some people might be somewhat put off. Hey, they don't really update their profile. It's not relevant. It's not up to date. You want to make sure that you're taking care of that. If that's not important to you, that's okay. But I think ultimately you should try to keep that as relevant as possible. And then lastly, you know, is that the only method, right? Is there only one way for them to see a point of view, or are you out there on other channels and other platforms? So I noticed we've got leading with emotional intelligence. I think is critical, like you said, Kat. But does anybody have any other external facing brand, statements or ideas that I didn't put up here that they'd like to contribute in the chat? Let's see if we get one or two in there. So far, we've had some really good examples. I'm just assuming people are furiously typing. That's okay. All right, I'll give it one more sec there. True. Yeah, that's fair, right? Getting hired platform for sure, for sure. And there's multiple platforms. This is one example. Okay, so we'll move on. So I promised you, here's my AI generated real estate like billboard as the I'm by the way, I'm the number one SE hirer out there, and that's what it looks like. So I thought that might be funny. Don't actually read any of the text because it's the AI model didn't really do so well with my prompts. Yeah, exactly. It's never. In fact, I'll even be really honest. There was another letter in between SE hire, and I had to block that out. Okay. All right. So a little comedic relief. Let's get into this a little bit more. I'm sure everybody's seen and heard of like the three legs of the stool model. Okay. And, what we're talking about today is attract, retain, and develop. Okay. And I think, it's a pretty well known model. But what I want to do is kind of flip that on its side, literally, and start to say, well, there's a lot more that's critical to that, to those three areas of focus, those three aspects of that model. So let's flip it under. Shout out to IKEA. There are some screws that really support those legs in there, and I think and when we talk about attract, I like the idea of passive marketing. I hinted at this earlier, but if you have content out there and people can watch and digest and take in that content, okay, that's the support system that can allow people to come to you. Very much like a marketing attribution, a marketing tool. You understand that they downloaded this white paper, that they clicked here on the website, and so on and so forth. I think that can be really important, so that when you finally get in front of a candidate, they may have already, a lot of the selling, a lot of the winning them over may have already happened. Not to say that they're difficult by any means, but maybe they've really aligned with you because of how you've portrayed yourself and put that out there. Now, we know that's not easy, and we'll talk about how we fit all that in. And then, obviously, from a retention and development standpoint, I think I mentioned transparency before, candor, right? Feedback back and forth, constantly doing that. I tell a lot of people that have worked for me, non-traditional candidates, really, really, highly experienced candidates, and eventual SEs, for example. Hey, I'm not worried. I'm not worried, right? And I think being really clear and open allows them to say, hey, I am a little freaked out, or this does worry me, or maybe I can calm them down by simply saying, again, hey, I'm not worried about this. I've seen this. I understand. We'll figure this out. It doesn't worry me. And I like to keep that really, really clear, open communication, and I think that's important to retention. And then, yeah, I guess I am really restating this, but I'm using the word here, purposeful. The opportunities to develop, right? I think you have to be intentional and purposeful. You do have to source them. You do have to find them. You may have to do a slight push. And it can be a little bit of a test. Remember here, if somebody comes to you at the end of the year and they say, hey, I don't really understand why I wasn't promoted, or why I didn't get more additional compensation, and you say something like, hey, we talked about these three development opportunities in your quarterly review, and hey, not too much happened here. Let's talk about that. I think it really helps to have a conversation, and drives that candor between them as you work to identify and bring forth those opportunities, and then drive them home. Okay, so I want to build on this, using the IKEA joke. I guess it's really assemble. We'll assemble on this. So where do we spend our time? Right? This by no means matches up perfectly with like where I spend my time. I wish the day to day was smaller and some of the other things were bigger, but I thought it'd be representative of, we know primarily we are spending time on day to day, right? We are looking at the forecast, right? We're putting out fires, we're getting resources, we're doing all the stuff we need to drive the business forward. But we need to recruit. We need to proactively reach out, perhaps an outbound, and we know we need to put content out there so that we can get some of that passive marketing that I described. But is there another bucket? So I'll ask the chat here, how does this break down, and maybe that fifth bucket? Is there a fifth bucket? Are there other things that we need to be thinking about as pre-sales leaders, above and beyond? Now, note the percentages here are probably off, but it's a good visual nonetheless. So, folks who are here, does anybody have any other ideas on where you might spend your time when it comes to hiring, outside of the day-to-day business as usual activities? inbound referrals, inbound people applying, outbound proactive, and of course content creation to supplement your message, or bring in some of that passive marketing to really help people. Um, yeah, that's a good call, Clifford. Um, you're right. It can be self promotion. Yeah, networking. Actually, that's a really good call. You know, in fact, Kat, I think you got a good call. We really don't have in here like learning, right? Like just working on our craft, right? Which is a combination of a technical sales leader, and yes, what I'm doing today. Your craft is your technical sales leader, but you need to network as well. You need to be talking to peers. You need to either probably be a mentor or be a mentee, right? I think those are a couple boxes that are missing. Um, okay, good. Thank you for the engagement on that. So let's continue down this path. Um, so by no means is this some sort of let's call it model that is highly fine tuned. I don't want to battle performance versus potential, but I think those are very common elements that we're looking at when we talk about talent and how we think about development per se. And so I've put a couple boxes in here where we start to see, hey, can somebody who has no XC experience eventually be high for performance and high potential? 100%. By no means are they low performance, low potential. That's the downfall of setting things up this way. But the visual starts to represent here that could we get quicker performance, perhaps, by somebody who's hands-on? Could we potentially see some really high impact, high potential from folks who know the domain, and perhaps somebody who's both an SE and knows the domain or industry, maybe coming from a competitor, let's say as an example, they can be immediately high performance, high potential, and really drive things forward. So this isn't an exhaustive model or diagram, but I think it's helpful to look at as we start to think, when I go to hire and maybe I look at an internal candidate, right? Time to value might be extremely critical there. Um, and getting them in role, they know the product, they know the market, right? That can be really, really beneficial. As well as like, let's go out and let's find somebody who's maybe setting up the product for per se. Um, and maybe they have that really great customer facing experience because they're just used to working with them. Maybe they're in fact a customer and now they can speak literally speak the language of a customer. Also, maybe they're a partner, right? And they understand the full cycle, selling the services, setting it up, right, managing it afterwards. Curious, like, why do we ever hire candidates who don't fit the above profiles, right? And I think this is maybe where we're getting into a situation where we start to think, well, gee, could we expand our net, and could we look at candidates that may not fit into that perfect profile, and what do we get by exploring that? And I think that's the key. Are we giving ourselves some potential to get to the differentiator, to the X factor? And so I like to think, from a non-traditional candidate, right? Um, they might just bring something else, right? And I think let's talk about how and why we could explore that as we go through. So this is a bit of a model, just sort of bring forth some of that context. But over here is a tad bit more of a framework that you could absolutely borrow and use. And we'll see if anybody else has anything to contribute in a second. So let's say we're looking at a candidate that is little or no sales experience, right? Here's a question that you could ask them, right? Why might we ask that type of question? Well, and again, rephrase it, set it up in the context that makes sense, but something along the lines of, I'm sort of checking to see how you might handle things. You haven't sold before. And what I've done here, and this is not quite binary, but I've put like, hey, maybe they nailed that, right? They don't really have experience in sales, but they've demonstrated to you with a really strong response back that they understand it, right? Or, and I want to put a little asterisk on this one because we'll get back to this, or maybe they said something where it didn't go so well, right? And maybe they actually explored how they learned a lesson, right? And that could be extremely valuable. You don't want to overlook that because hey, they have no experience in sales and they didn't answer the question really well because it wasn't a win. Let's explore that they've learned a lesson there. So we'll switch gears a little bit. Let's say we've got a candidate that we're looking at, right, that has a ton of domain or industry, right? Maybe this is a question you can ask them. What happens when you get out of your comfort zone a little bit? Tell me about that, right? And once again, not quite binary, but okay, great. Have they had success? And then what am I listening for? I'm listening. Hey, can that be repeatable, right? Were they intentional or was that just sort of a luck thing? And then maybe they missed the mark. Maybe it just didn't come across really, really well. And so that can be your little bit of a test to understand. Somebody might really know the domain well, but could they learn other stuff? Because hey, we offer things we might acquire, etc. Right? You need to think about what the business needs potentially now and in the future. Okay, so let's say somebody knows the role well, right? They really understand it. In my opinion, we're now testing a little bit for their mindset. We took see growth mindset here in the comments. We're testing for their motivation, right? So, tell me what you've picked up on from research or from others, right? And tell me what you want to do with your career. I don't know if I want a rental. I don't know if I want somebody to come on for 10 to 12 months. I want somebody maybe that is looking to grow and sees opportunity, not sort of to come in and just jump into the next role. So I'm looking for alignment there, but you'll notice there's a little bit of a test at the end there. I want to know, have you had conversations with others, right? If you're an SC and you know it really well, right? You're not just going to walk in the door, right? Make sure you're talking to other SCs at that organization and learn from them and bring that perspective to me because I'm kind of testing for that in this example. Last one. Let's say somebody is non-traditional, or somebody's exploring the role, right? What you want to do is say, hey, well, what have you put into this so far, right? Do you know about the role? And maybe take what you've learned so far, and again, a little bit of a test, and tell me about when you've had to operate in a similar way, right? And okay, boom, you might see somebody who's like, wow, they really get it. Or you might find somebody that probably needs a little bit of support. So give them the feedback. Say, hey, I think you should check out, Pre-Sales Academy, or I think you should go and take this course, or I think you should go here or there, right? And then, hey, if that person comes back to you and says, hey, I went through and did what you said, that could be one of the best candidates you'll ever get if they take that feedback and run with it and then eventually come back. So remember, there's a long game in here. So again, by no means are the previous slide and this slide exhaustive. The idea is, where's your line of questioning taking you? What are you trying to get out of the different profiles? Because let's get it straight here. Like, we all want that perfect high performance candidate, right? We want that. I get it. If all those boxes are ticked, if they happen to be in that far right of that matrix or chart that I showed, fantastic, right? Figure out a way to close on them, get them in your organization. But does that necessarily mean that somebody maybe who had a different answer or a different approach couldn't be a high potential candidate? And I implore everybody on this session to think about, hey, what questions are you asking, and how are you interpreting their responses to then understand their downstream impact? If you look at a line chart for a typical SE, in terms of their onboard ramp and impact, that might be a very, sharp incline. If you look at somebody who's maybe come from a non-traditional, their ramp time could take 1 to 2 months longer. But do we get, in fact, that potential difference maker as we explore and look at individuals from a different perspective? And I think if there's any takeaway here, I think, if you have the appropriate ramp time, and you know that maybe the sales business that you'll be aligning them to, the team or the reps, are open to it, consider looking into that. Yes, the ramp time could be potentially longer. Yes, it might be a little bit more of a risk, but with risk, there's reward, right? And you could find somebody that could take this role in your business to that next level, and how you just need to evaluate and manage that risk. So there is no perfect candidate, as we know. There's a lot of different types of candidates. Think about what you need. Are you backfilling? Do you have additional headcount? Do you have time? Sometimes you need to slot somebody in and get the job done, and that's fantastic. That's what we need to do as leaders. And other times we can actually try to enact some change and difference, because that person who may have previously been a teacher or some other role, they could bring a new perspective in that you've never thought of, and that can be really meaningful to your success as a leader and to their ultimate success. Okay, so this is kind of an aggressive uh, quote from Nick Saban, who maybe some people don't know, or some people don't like potentially, but he was the Alabama football coach for many years. And essentially what he created at Alabama was, that was a destination. Okay, that if you wanted to go to that school and play football, you were one of the best and only the best. And when you went to their facilities and their school and everything, that was top notch. And when you came out of there, you were looked upon. And I think the real reason I'm putting this quote up there is, what is your shop? What is your org or your group or your team? How do you want to demonstrate yourself out there? Because that was his trick, was we are the best. We're going to bring in the best. And so think about how you are set up, and think about how you are perceived, because if you want to bring in top talent, you absolutely need to make sure that you're set up for that. So moving on from that, let's talk a little bit about the process. So as you're engaging with candidates and going through the hiring process, we talked about that awareness piece, right? The passive marketing, the content, and other things that are out there to support that, because you want to make a really good first impression. When you get onto a call with somebody, okay, you can take a lot of that risk out of screwing up that first impression, when they come in and they're very much aligned with you, and they're really interested and excited to have that conversation. From my point of view, I think it's really important to answer their questions passionately, right? And I think it's important to be really, really crystal clear on what's happening there. Through that process, but it's important to make that first impression. And absolutely, if you have the appropriate network and you have people advocating, you start telling them, go talk to so and so, let me introduce you to so and so, and you start to let them get the social proof, to feel comfortable. This is a process to move from another company, from another career, sometimes different location. This is a process, and you'll see the bottom part here that's broken out, that I've highlighted. Those tools and that part of the process that's there, that's not very different from what many of us do as a job in pre-sales. We are selling, right? You need to coach an individual on what it takes to get through the process, because it may be very different. A technology software SaaS company can be very different than a traditional business or government or anything else like that. And so you absolutely need to be comfortable to coach them, and you need to be able to objection handle. Especially, I feel like the objection handling aspect is really important when it comes to dealing with potentially people who already have the experience, right? They might be asking for certain things or looking for certain things, and you want to be able to be ready and have the same use the same objection handling techniques you use in a demo, for example, here. And lastly, closing. And we're going to talk about what closing means, because I think that is, again, we're SEs, many of us, and we're not always there doing the close. We are there in the validation steps typically. But as a leader, you need to close on people because it is competitive as you know what out there. Okay, so this picture is a comedian at the Comedy Store. So, he's up there, he's doing his set. And there's a real reason why I put that up there, which is as you're looking to close on candidates, you have to have a pitch. You have to be have a well rehearsed and well thought out pitch. It is competitive, and you need to implore and educate and make people feel comfortable to change their lives in many cases. And so the Comedy Store at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night, you could see Dave Chappelle. And what does Dave Chappelle do at the Comedy Store that late? He's in front of a small audience, riffing and testing out bits from his set. And he's seeing how the response from the audience comes in, from the crowd. And he does that night over night, and he puts it all together into his Netflix special. And he looks and hears. And the comparison here is when you have conversations with people internally, with your network, with your peers, with your family, your friends, you're testing your material for your pitch, and you bring it together, and it's always sort of evolving, but you really need to think through your strategy on what will hit home, because like I said, there's another Kevin pitching to that same candidate. And if they're better than you, they're going to get them. And now we're not talking about like selling snake oil here. We're just talking about the fact that, it's competitive and there's lots of opportunity out there. Okay, so we're going to talk about the closing time. All right. When you're looking at maybe a candidate who's coming from another tech company, another software company, they're going to be very familiar with the OTE, right? But somebody who's coming from a non-traditional role, they may not have any concept of what OTE is, and you have to explain that to them, and you have to make them feel comfortable, especially if you're looking at somebody who's changing their career. If you're hiring an executive to become an SE because they want to change their career, they might be a little freaked out that their base salary is now lower because they're taking a 70-30 or an 80-20, and now they have to rely on that variable. You have to educate them on what that variable is and how quotas work, and be confident in where the business is going, and share that with them. Because if you don't, right, that could be a blocker, right? This probably looks very much like how it works when you're selling deals with your sales reps. Same sort of thing. If price is out of whack and we didn't set good expectations, we can lose the deal. Same thing goes here. So if they're coming from a base and bonus, or just maybe a base thing, you need to educate that on them. And then also, let's talk about working style. What's the ratio? If somebody is already an SE, do you freak them out by saying, "Hey, you're going to be covering 7 or 8 sales reps"? And they're like, "What? What does that mean?" If they're a teacher and they're teaching 30 kids in a class, and you tell them, "Hey, you're going to be covering 2 enterprise reps," they're probably like, "Yeah, sign me up," right? So that could be good for them. But the key thing is breaking out. Hey, I don't want to call you a resource, but you are a resource. We SEs are trusted advisors, trusted partners, they're sales reps, but you absolutely have to understand people will be putting time in your calendar, and you'll need to be working, very closely with somebody else, and they have certain goals and you have certain goals. So, talking through that and helping educate, but also making them feel comfortable. Um, if you can't run down your onboarding ramp, really, really articulate it clearly, break out that the fact that we are investing, that can be actually a selling feature, right? That can be a spot where you say, "Hey, you're doing your role in whatever business." SEs are typically set up for 3 to 4 months of ramping and onboarding time. So we are investing in you. If you're a sales rep, you might only get a week or two, for example. So I think that can be a really nice selling feature, for example. I mentioned this, well, obviously with the comedy breakout, your pitch, make sure your pitch is tailored to the individual. Um, and then lastly, make the verbal ask, right? Don't go for the hard ask. But if you've done a really good job on all these steps, you will start to see the fact that you can give them a little bit of time and they'll come back pretty quickly and say, hey, I want to get the job. Um, okay, so let's wrap up here. This is my last slide. Some advice. As I mentioned, do your best to invest in yourself. How do we do that? Well, don't shy away. You probably have the content that just needs to be brought together. I like to put a deadline out there and then work towards that. That can be helpful, but you probably have content as a leader or as somebody else. You're probably a subject matter expert. You probably have a spot where you can bring that together. If you need help, use me as a resource. I'll give you a creative idea on how to spin that. When we say be bold, an example is, and I don't know if I mentioned this up front, but a couple of years ago, I tried to join DemoFest as a speaker. I submitted my, my content, and they said, not going to work, Kevin, for DemoFest, but we want you to do a webinar. And that was like a very refreshing thing for me in the sense that I put myself out there and I was rewarded. They say, not this time, pal, for the conference. I finally got to this year, but at the time they threw me on to another webinar. And again, it's just you're setting up one brick at a time on this walkway towards creating content and putting yourself out there. Again, I think always be authentic. Please always just work with who you are, be who you are. I think that's been the best advice that I've learned through the years, and that's been effective for me. Okay, so I talked about this really, really early on in the session. Develop a framework. Make sure you don't sit there and over engineer it, architect it, or whatever, but have a system, right? Some sort of system in place for managing your recruiting and approach. And then when you do that, obviously you iterate it, obviously you adjust, but use that as a process so you can rely on. But don't worry about documenting it in swim lanes and all that. Just have somewhat of a system or a framework that you can rely on. And then go around to your peers, share that with them. Say, this is how I approach it. What's your advice? And it's, I don't really think it's IP. It's just, here's my idea on how to organize myself, and here's how I do it. What are your thoughts? Go ahead and take this, take that, and everybody gets better. And that's the beauty of the pre-sales industry or group that we have. Everybody's willing to share. I am better today because of all my peers and the networks and the group for all of us learning. So that is my session. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much. My LinkedIn is here. And appreciate everybody contributing and being involved. So there's a bunch of comments in here, but I think a lot of them are just sort of reinforcing a couple of items and steps. So Jenna, did we get any questions or anything else like that?
Yes, we sure did. Let's start. If you have any more, please drop them in. We have about 10 minutes before I have some closing items for us. But one question is, what are your thoughts on hiring candidates with history of successful tech sales, but not in your domain? You did touch on this a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, absolutely. I really think that it will be challenging for that individual, but I also think that if you're a hiring manager or leader making that decision, right? Did you see what you needed to be convinced? Myself, I went from GRC to CRM. And a big factor in that was that I thought a lot about, well, I use CRM, and here's how I use it to be successful. And I broke those out just as an SE would into demo moments or whatever important value drivers, and I really tried to make those compelling. And I think if you are moving from one industry or domain to another, I think strongly I strongly recommend that you do your due diligence, and you do discovery. You talk to people from there, and you bring a point of view. Your point of view doesn't have to be 100% accurate and complete, but it does demonstrate that you're willing to put effort in, and that you're open to going and trying to figure something out, because you may not know. You may not know that domain because you haven't been through the 3-4 months onboarding and ramping. So show that the effort's there, bring a point of view from that effort, and try to put it together in a compelling way to share. Hey, yes, I don't know that area so well, but I can, and here's some experiences or examples of that. And if you can bring that across in a compelling way, that's how you can change hearts and minds.
Awesome. It does. Along with that question is when you hire someone with deep domain skills, what are your thoughts on that?
I think hiring with deep domain skills can be important. Remember, it is a collection, right? So if you think about your organization, do you have somebody in that organization that is more technical minded? Do you have somebody in that organization who's more maybe advisory, right? Understands the domain, the theory? Are there other folks who are generalists, right? You need to complement that, right? Like a sports team isn't just made up of forwards. There's forwards, defense, and goalies, right? And we need to think about that. So if you approach each hire in thinking just about that, this is what I need right now, and you don't look at the larger collection, as Kat put it there, I think you can miss out, because there can be a heavy emphasis on hiring internal people and then not getting that external point of view. There can be a heavy emphasis on bringing on deep domain folks, but then not getting the benefit of people who maybe came from a different industry and have some know-how. It's all about the risk you're willing to take. And I tend to be less risk averse than most in when it comes to hiring.
Awesome. And along with that, is for high potential candidates, how would you test their skills and what techniques would you leverage?
Absolutely. Like if you're looking at folks that maybe haven't done demos or discovery, and some of those are, I would assign is a tough word, but you don't want to put people through a terrible experience. With really good expectations, ask them to take on a task, or to go and have a conversation, and say, hey, I'd like you to go speak with this person, and ask them about this, and then you can get the feedback from them. Or you can say, do you mind putting together a 3 slides on this? I don't have perfect examples off the top of my head right now, because that's a really good question, but I think without making them jump through hoops, find small opportunities to test them, for lack of a better word, not test, but for them to take that on, to then demonstrate to you their commitment and where they're at. Because when you find a non-traditional candidate, very much like selling software, sometimes people come through the pipeline 2-3 times before they ever buy. Similar to that, you might have a very high potential candidate who's not quite ready for what you need right now, and send them off with some feedback and learning, and then let them come back later too.
Awesome. All right. Another question is, are there any innovative tools or technologies that you recommend using for these best practices?
I think I've been stumped. I don't tools or technology that I use. I mean, I did put LinkedIn up there. I have in the past used LinkedIn, like recruiting. It can be a very effective tool, especially if you've got high volume. If you have 100, 200 people applying for your role, that can be really helpful to manage that. But I don't want to say I'm old school, because I definitely lean into technology. But I'm usually a combination of meetings through Google Meet or Zoom or Teams. I try to sometimes get into using Slack or Teams with people versus email. I really dislike email, so probably Slack or Teams to get into more of a conversation with them versus email. That would be about my extent.
Okay, cool. There, a question just came through on any thoughts on breaking through companies seemingly only hiring senior level SEs as a newer SE?
Yeah, I mean, experience is somewhat of a blessing and a curse, right? How do you get experience? You only get it if you you do the thing for a while, right? And sometimes I rely maybe too much on my experience and not enough. So I think my advice to you, Jeffrey, is look at who the hiring manager is and really understand what they're looking for, and even ask others around them to get that point of view. In sometimes a particular hiring manager is just steadfast and will not change their mo and just bring on people with a certain profile. Maybe that's not the right person or right company for you. So take a look at another organization and understand, well, hey, can I perceive anything from their LinkedIn or anything that I've picked up, and then try to play towards that, because we are talking about bias here. Um, Bias is alive and real. We know that. And so, how do you attack that bias? Right? You understand what they care about, and you bring together some really smart, compelling. I call them narratives, usually like stories, narratives. People really, it's hard to sell with stats, sell yourself with stats. I did 10 million last year. It's like nobody can check that. But if you bring together a really strong story that, matches with that, it doesn't always have to be exactly relevant. I think getting out of your comfort zone and saying, yeah, well, while I've never been in GRC before, but I do understand risk because I worked at a pharma company, and we would lose things in security and all this stuff. Like, you can come up with a scenario, but ask for help, because you might not be able to do that on your own. So look for help. And I think another example there is look for introductions too, and go and ask questions. Bring a point of view to those people. You will not always get if you ask 10 people in a company to chat with them, you might only get one or two. And so the efforts will pay off, but it is a hard challenge. And then, Jeffrey, if you do get that role as an SC or an SE and you start to build that experience, pay it forward, right? Go back and help people. That's the key.
Awesome. Okay. And finally, in the hiring process, I think this is the last question that we have answered. How much does company and team culture play a culture fit play a role in your hiring process?
Um, I like to share with people how it can get as straightforward as benefits. Hey, is there any ability to take courses and get reimbursed for that? I like to have a good, strong point of view on that so that I can talk about that. Um, and what I try to do is understand from them what they care about, and then match that with how the company operates and sets that up. If I'm worried about something, I'll be pretty clear. Hey, you might be looking for this. We don't really do that here. Like, is that a problem? Because I'm also testing and understanding as well. So it does play a pretty key part. And I think as a leader, you need to be very well versed in all aspects of culture, benefits, in all the makeup of the organization, because that could be a differentiator.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you so much. If you don't mind dropping screen share so I can just provide a little information. Thank you, Kevin, for all of your expertise. I want to just point out a couple things. We only have a few seconds left. Please check out our virtual Expo Hall with our premier partners. They've gone above and beyond to contribute to making this event successful for you all, and they are fantastic. Don't forget the raffle giveaway. It's up there in the information. We are also bringing DemoFest back on the road, and we had a great time in San Francisco and are going to New York City next month and London in the fall. And thank you all for joining us for this session. You will automatically be pushed to the next session in your track. And if you'd like to switch tracks, just toggle on the agenda tab at the top left of your screen. Thanks again, and we will see you soon.